The plan for today is to briefly introduce you all to Inquire and then share information about the laws and guidance around exams. And then we'll have lots of time for your own questions. We can ask you to submit them a little bit later on in our chat, but we'll explain that as we're going through. Hopefully some of you do know about Inquire and heard of us before, but I'll explain just a little bit about us. We're the Scottish Advice Service for Additional Support for Learning. We've existed since 1999, so more than 20 years. We're funded by the Scottish Government to provide independent advice and information for children and young people to parents, carers and professionals. And that's really about the children's rights and the legislations and guidance relating to support for learning. As the slide says above, for what we've got here is our vision at Children in Scotland is that all children are supported, included and listened to throughout their education. What we can offer and how we do that is we have our helpline. So our helpline, you can call us on our allocated times, you can send us an email. We've got a web form for chats in for email as well and web chat. We also have our websites as well for Inquire and Reach, which is particularly for young people. These have both just recently been updated, really good new content, look fab, worked really hard on them all. So I hope that there's a lot of really good information and it's broken down into better sections, so it's an easier read for people. We also have a list of publications and fact sheets on our website as well under our resources. That could be more about just the general rights and the laws, and also about specific key issues that there are. And I think as well, there's a lot of awareness that we try to do, raising that through outreach sessions like this, our social media, and other things as we're going through. I think that the most important thing and the reason why we do this and our goal is to be able to help you all, and that's to make sure that you feel more listened to and supported. I know as a parent it's very difficult and challenging when we're going through these things, so we hope that by sharing the information with you, you feel more confident in taking action and who you need to speak to, and you've got more of an understanding about the rights and then the responsibilities of the schools and local authorities. Also as well, that we can, give you the information, and so you can gain the right knowledge to the steps that you need to take. And if we're not sure, or not so much we're not sure, but if there's other things that we can help, it's about where to find more information to help if we need to signpost you to other organisations. So tonight, the aim of the session is really to summarise the laws and guidance around exams and assessments, share the key information around SQA exams, ultimately answer your questions about exams, support and adjustments. There's more information that we have on our section on our parent side about support with exams, assessments, and these things will be linked in the chat for you to be able to have a look. And just to explain that after the this is going to be recorded and you'll get an email. So any links that have been sent, you'll have a copy of those things sent as well. So what we're going to do is, as we said earlier, we wanted you to please submit your questions. We'll have lots of time, hopefully about 30 minutes at the end to answer them. So you can start sharing these now. You can do that by putting them in the chat box. But what we do ask is please respect everybody's privacy, and by avoiding naming your child's school, any teachers, etc. If it's possible, can you send your questions to the whole group rather than just to Beth or I, just so that we definitely don't miss them. And we'll try and go through as many questions as we can. We might bunch some of them together if they're quite similar. There might be some that we can't answer if they're super specific, but always know that if we don't get a chance to answer them, you're more than welcome to come through to our helpline service, as we mentioned earlier, and you can do that through the phone, web chat, emails, and we can give you more specific advice back. So I'm just going to pass you back to Beth. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Sharon. So yeah, let's get going with our focus on exams and exam support. There's two pieces of legislation, first of all, that are important when we talk about exams. Both of these laws apply throughout your child's time at school, and that includes during exam time and exams as well. The first one is the Additional Support for Learning Act, often called the ASL Act. And this law says that a child has additional support needs where, for whatever reason, they can't benefit from school education without extra help. It says that local authorities, so that's your local council, must make adequate and efficient provision to support children and young people with additional needs and to help them do the best they can at school. So that includes identifying what a child or young person's needs are and then putting support in place that meets those needs. Often this responsibility is carried out directly by your school on behalf of the local authority. The law doesn't say exactly what support should look like because every child and their situation is different, but support should be based on your child's individual needs. The second piece of legislation is the Equality Act. This act means that your child should not be treated unfavourably or discriminated against because of any of the protected characteristics, and one of those is disability. So disability is defined as a physical or mental impairment that has a substantial and long-term adverse effect on a person's ability to carry out normal day-to-day activities. So if your child's needs fit within that definition, then they're protected by the Equality Act as well as the ASL Act. So the Equality Act is the one that includes the idea of reasonable adjustments, and that means that school must do what they reasonably can to avoid treating disabled children and young people unfairly or putting them at a disadvantage compared to other children and young people. There's more about these pieces of legislation and more information about your child's rights on our website. It's a page called Your Child Rights, and Kat will post that link in the chat for you as well. So just a quick note here to say that things do work slightly differently if your child isn't at a local authority school. If your child is homeschooled or at an independent school, it's important to know that they don't have those rights. They're not covered by the additional support for learning legislation, the ASL Act. The ASL Act only covers local authority schools. If your child's got a place at an independent school that's funded by the local authority, then the ASL Act does apply, because the local authority is still responsible for their education. It's useful to know, though, that independent schools do need to follow the Equality Act, so they can't discriminate against disabled pupils. They must make reasonable adjustments. We're going to be talking about SQA guidance that would apply to any child or young person sitting an SQA exam, doing it at a centre, wherever that centre may be. And there's a couple of links for more information there that you'll get when we send over the PowerPoint to you. So today we are mostly going to focus on exam support in terms of what arrangements a child or young person can have in the actual exam. But it's important to remember that the legislation that we just mentioned, the ASL Act and the Equalities Act, also applies for the rest of your child's education and the time around their exams. So, like as we said, the definition of additional support needs says a child has additional support needs if they need extra help for whatever reason. So it's important to think about what that support might mean around exams in particular. So it might be support to cope with the exam stress or anxiety. Maybe they need extra support during study leave. Is it particular academic support they need, for example, with revision materials, understanding how to answer particular questions, that kind of thing. Or maybe it's like time management to help them support the exam, to manage with the exam timetable. These are the sorts of things that you can talk to your child's school about if you think things like this or that time around exams is going to have an impact on your child. Then the school should be putting support in place to help them with those things, even if it's just a short-term need that they have. But our main focus today is going to be support in the exams themselves. So your child's exam support should be designed to help them to access the assessment, to help them to be able to show their knowledge, their skills and their understanding. So exam supports can't be used to help a child or young person who hasn't developed the knowledge or skills that are being assessed. So by that, what I mean is, for example, if your child struggles with reading, having a reader in their exam, in their history exam, would help them to demonstrate their understanding of World War I or the Jacobites or whatever it might be, because it would help them to access the questions that are being asked. It wouldn't give them any of the answers, but it would help them to understand the questions. The answers themselves would come from their own knowledge. If you compare that to something like an English exam, if there was an English exam that was designed to test their reading skills, a child wouldn't be able to use a reader in that context in the same way, because it's the skill of reading that they're being assessed on. So really what that means is that exam supports shouldn't compromise the integrity of the qualification. That's the way that SQA phrase it. Basically, it means the exam should still be fair for everybody doing it. So the exam support that your child gets should help to remove disadvantage rather than provide advantage. It shouldn't change the level or the standard of what is being assessed either. So as with all support, the support your child gets should be based on their individual needs. So we've mentioned already the local authority are technically responsible for that, but usually exam supports will be arranged by your child's school directly on behalf of the local authority. And there's loads of ways that your child could be supported in their exams. It's important to remember that your child's needs and the support they get to meet those needs might be different for different subjects. So, for example, if your child has difficulties with reading large amounts of text, then they might need support to help them with reading in an exam like English, where there's loads of text to read, but they might not need that same support in maths, where the exam doesn't have as much text. Last thing to think about is that the support should reflect the pupil's normal way of working. So if your child usually gets support in class, it might be appropriate for them to get something similar in their exam as well. As an example, if your child is always using a laptop to type up their classwork in geography, then it might be appropriate for them to have a laptop in their geography exam as well. There are some examples here from the SQA specifically. They have guidelines about how support, they call them assessment arrangements, should be used. They've got loads of resources on their website. I've linked to a couple of them on the slides there that you might like to have a look at for more information. But here are some examples. So it might be that the question paper that your child gets is adapted, and that could be something like larger font, or it could be an online version of the paper. They might get technology or ICT. As we've mentioned already, Call Scotland are an organisation that know all about that. They support children with additional needs and disabilities who can benefit from assistive technologies. They've got loads of information and advice. They can loan technology, they can support assessments, all that kind of thing. If you think technology is something that your child might need or might benefit from, it's worth having a look at Call Scotland and maybe getting in touch with them for some more information. Other supports include extra time, a reader, which is either somebody physically to read it beside you or an electronic reader. A scribe is where somebody sits and sort of dictates whatever your child is writing down. So whatever they say, the scribe would write it down for them. You can get electronic versions of those as well. Might be that they have separate accommodation. They do their exam in a different space, in a smaller space quite often. It might be supervised breaks. It might be a practical assistant. Like I say, the SQA has got guidance on what all of those things are and also how those arrangements work. So they've got, expectations for what a scribe can do and can't do and that sort of thing. So when you are planning exam support, really for all exams, to decide what your child needs in their exams, their school should be working with you and your child. Often exam support is decided by a subject teacher. They've got a deep understanding of the subject, of how the exam works, and hopefully your child as well. So they should be able to make appropriate decisions about your child's exam support. Your child should be involved in that decision. There should be a conversation with them. And as a parent, you should be informed about this planning and have the chance to have some input in that as well. As we've already mentioned, exam support should, as far as it can be similar to your child's usual way of working. And linked to that, it's important that your child understands what support they're going to have. It shouldn't be a surprise on exam day what support that they're getting. Quite often we hear that schools will send a letter home with details about what exam support's been arranged, but you and your child can also get in touch with class teachers or the exam coordinator to check in with planning or to clarify what support is confirmed. Oh, sorry. When we're talking about SQA exams specifically, there should be an exam coordinator who's responsible for arranging exams and ensuring that support for those exams is in place. Part of this process is sending evidence to the SQA that shows your child needs the support for that exam. So we're just going to talk now about evidence in a bit more detail. So the SQA needs evidence that proves your child requires their exam support. and it's the responsibility of your child's school and the exam coordinator specifically to make sure that that evidence is provided to the SQA. There's lots of things that SQA can take as evidence, and I've listed a few of them here. So the SQA will accept evidence that teachers or learning support staff have recognised that your child has a particular need. Sharon, could you go through the rest of this while I cough?
Absolutely, thanks. So when it comes down to, obviously there's lots of ways that the evidence can be taken. First, SQA will accept any evidence that the teacher for their learning support that's recognised, as I say, about a particular need that a child has. It's so important that your child and young person themselves may have identified that they need particular help, and they're sharing that with the school. There's also sometimes there's identification made through proof of like a formal diagnosis, and they'll have specific things that are listed to say these things will help, these particular strategies or solutions. But it's really important to know that they don't need to have a formal diagnosis to be entitled to the support. It really just says that that's more, there's been a more in-depth check, so that some of the things to obviously be able to put into place. Evidence might also be recorded in the way that they're doing in their learning plans, as normally there's lots of different plans, all different schools use different ones. It could be a child support plan, it could be a young person's plan, it can also be an individual education plan. It really just often comes down to the particular support that is most known that they are going to be getting in their everyday learning. So if they're getting that support, that should almost be the crux for saying, well, if they're getting that support on a day-to-day basis, this should be almost mirrored and then checked to see if there is any different or additional support that would still be needed when it comes to exams. This is examples of children obviously using the support that they've got, as I said, in class already. There's evidence that they've done previous work and using a scribe during the lessons, and that's worked really well for them. But again, in no way is that showing that it's given the young person or child an advantage. It's about taking that disadvantage away from them. The SQA will obviously say that the evidence can also include teachers' observations or comments. I think one of the things to understand is if they are putting that information in and they've got that support and that's been working for them and they've been using it for some amount of time, when they're doing, there is potentially no further evidence needed. It's just that the teachers can put down, or the SQA coordinator, a statement of support to saying this is just the normal way of learning and producing work for this young person. So there may not need to be a lot more evidence. If there's more specific things requested, then they may say, you know, SQA would be the ones that would come back and say, well, we need evidence of this. So lastly, just wanted to mention that the SQA, you know, is clear that the children should not have to complete assessments with and without support to provide that they need this every year. I think what's so important is we know that this is something that schools sometimes do, but they don't need to repeatedly do this. That obviously gives them added stress, which is not necessary. Schools do have to confirm, obviously, the exam supports that are needed and if they're still appropriate or if there's needed to be any change, but that should be reviewed throughout the whole year through their normal support as well, and then when they're coming up, because it's so important that there can be similar adjustments or different adjustments for every single subject. There may be more adjustments that need to be made for one and just maybe one for one particular subject. And I think from that, it's so important because the school need to think about the well-being of the pupils. So when they're taking that exam and that if the support is not in place, that obviously the distress that causes and the upset, then they need to be looking forward to ways that they can evidence that they definitely need it. And then that's where it can be put forward by the SQA coordinator.
Thanks, Sharon. I've got a cough drop, so hopefully I will be all right. So yeah, that is gathering evidence. The next bit here, we just wanted to sort of summarize in general what you can do if you have concerns. We're going to answer your questions more specifically later, but for the most part, these are the steps that we think would be helpful to you. So first things first, if you've got a concern about your child's exam support, we would recommend that you contact the school directly. You could do that in writing, you could send an email to the school, or you could ask for a meeting to discuss this. You could ask to meet with the exam coordinator if it's about SQA exams, or you could meet with your child's head of year or their guidance teacher if it's internal assessments. If you've done this and you've still got concerns, then you would want to contact the head teacher as your first point of escalation, and following that, you can contact the local authority. Might also be worth considering things like advocacy if you need some support to get those views across or your child's views across. And mediation is also a good way of facilitating those conversations. Mediation's when a neutral third party meets with you and the school or the local authority. You all share your views and you come to an agreement together. You can contact the SQA, but they do make it clear that they rely on schools to plan and provide the evidence for support. So the SQA shouldn't really be contacted until you've tried all of those previous steps that we've mentioned. But the SQA can consider your concerns and can choose to investigate them. So we will now open up to some questions. So if you can put them in the chat. And Sharon, we're going to do the first one that we already had prepared.
Yeah, thank you, Beth. I think one of the things that we often hear on the helplines quite a lot is actually when your child's not being offered the support that they need. That could just be generally within their learning. It's not necessarily just for exams. And I think sometimes that's where it can be so evident that they require additional support. So what we would always say is if you're really not happy or you're concerned or your child most importantly is concerned, it's about then trying to go to the right people, ask for a meeting. Now that could be the first protocol sometimes is for the head of learning support or their guidance or pastoral care. It's about asking for a meeting so that everybody can sit down and have a real open and honest discussion about their understanding of your child's needs, what support, if any, that they have in place already, and what different support do they feel that could be beneficial for them. What we sometimes say is it's sometimes really good to have a written support plan or something recorded. And what that would do is, as we say, is make sure there's a joint understanding of what the needs are, what support that they are going to have, how that looks for them, and from different ways, from do they get extra time, not just for exams, but if for any other internal assessments, is there anything that they require about work being, sent to them before, so that they have time for extra reading, do they have access to sometimes in the learning support base. There's all these different things, and what is so important is it really has to be considered and it's looked at as on the child's individual requirements, and that's what's important. It then comes down to, on that support plan, is then saying, well, actually, okay, we've got all these things, this is what the support is, this is how it's going to look for them, but then when it's going to be reviewed, the most important thing is support should be reviewed throughout the entire year. It's not just we're going to have a meeting in 6 months' time. It should be continuously reviewed, and that's done by observations in the class with the teachers and any other work or any other assessments that they're doing. Then that's about, also at the end of that, is then coming back and how they're going to update you of how that's working. If that's not working for you and you feel you're not getting that that right information back to you, or you feel it's, you're consistently asking for support and they're saying it's been provided and it's not, we would then say you need to further escalate that to the head teacher first of all, and give them the opportunity to see if they can just speak with the learning support and their guidance. If then it's still not working, then there is a local authority contact that every local authority has, that we would then suggest that you move forward and then contact them to see if they can help to, resolve it. There is more information on our fact sheets for solving problems. We'll also have a link on our webpage to any local authority additional support for learning needs contacts for all local authorities, and they'll be put into the chat. But there's a really, as I said earlier on the website, there's a section just for parents, and there's a really good way that it breaks it all down, 7 subsections, that's good at all the information, and all these fact sheets are linked to that as well. So I hope that covers some of that part. And if we want to maybe just see what the first question is, and we can take that for the evening.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for that, Sharon. So one of the questions we've got is someone's mentioned that their child is in S2. and they were struggling with a recent assessment because they weren't provided with any accommodations. And the question is, should they be getting support in S2 in these earlier exams and assessments? To be honest, the short answer is yes, they should be. This support, like we say, support and access to learning is a right no matter what stage of school that you're at. And also, as we've said, in terms of gathering evidence, if a young person has had that support for a long time throughout their time in education, it's just further evidence that that's what they need in exams. Definitely worth a conversation with the school about what that support might look like. Quite often at an earlier stage, it's a good opportunity to sort of test the water and see what kind of support it is that they need, you know, what is it that they're struggling with, and how could that support, how could that need be met with what kind of support. You know, there's lots of different ways that a child can be supported in exams, and finding the right one for them is a really important thing to do. School staff should have ideas about the best ways that might work. But yeah, certainly if they're only in S2, that's a great opportunity to then spend the next couple of years working out how things work best for them, so that they then are used to that environment. They're used to in their exams, you know, using a laptop, or they're used to using an electronic reader, or whatever that support might be. But yeah, definitely worth speaking to their school about getting that support in place now, and then hopefully keeping that support, or making sure that that support's working for them in the long term as well. We've got another question here, Sharon, if I can pass it to you. This one is someone who says that their young person has been absent from school a lot recently. If they're absent from school during the exam period, do they get to sit their exams? Can they get support if they're not at school?
The answer to that is yes, they should be getting any support that they require. I think what can be very difficult is if they're not being able to attend school. But the most important thing is that if your child is too unwell to attend school, the local authority still have a responsibility to providing them with an adequate and efficient form of education. Now that can be sending work home, it can be doing the normal thing from their Glow or Google Classroom, whatever way that they're doing their learning. It could be that they're sending individual work home. It's really, that comes back to having a conversation with maybe their guidance teacher or their head of year, whoever's working with you whilst your child is off. It should be some kind of point of contact. I think when it comes to that, they should be given as much support as they can to make sure that they're ready to be able to fully support them to be able to sit their exams, because they still have the right to do that. I think from your point of view as their parent, it's about then saying how can that look for them. So if it is about saying, you know, maybe normally they couldn't attend in the big hall, does that mean that they maybe could come in for the exam, but they'd maybe need to have separate accommodation because they've been off? Is there going to be a requirement for extra time? But it really will come down to the needs of support. It's not about saying, well, they've missed work, so they need extra time to maybe understand the exam. It's more about what the support that they need, what their additional support is, and how that can look for them. So a discussion with the SQE coordinator within the school as well, if maybe the guidance or even some of the learning support are not sure, they would be able to have that chat with you. But ultimately, they should be given as much support as they can to be able to participate in the exams and make sure that they're ready to do so. Is there anything else you want to add in, Beth?
No, I think you covered that really well. I'm coughing again, so I'm going to give you another question while I do that, if it's okay. I've got a question here. Someone says that their child is struggling at school. They're finding it difficult to go into the classrooms because the sort of sound overload, it triggers their anxiety. So they're missing a lot of class. What can they do so that they don't end up disadvantaged in the exam at the end of the year? Okay.
Firstly, can I just ask, Susan Clay, I think you're on from here. Could you turn your video off, please? Sorry, it's just that because we're recording it, it's showing yourself on the video. And then I'll answer that question. Thank you, Susan. Going back to that one, yeah, you know, that can be really difficult for your child if they're finding out from the noise factor. I think it's about, again, going in and making sure that, you know, you've had a chat with the guidance teachers or the learning support, and if they're getting that, because that can be seen as an additional support need if they're finding that really challenging. Could that be that they would then be given extra time in the support base, or is there other work that they can be given? Not necessarily extra work home, but can they be given a quieter area to be able to do the learning, to help process it, make sure they're up to date with everything, you know, trying to work from that way. I think it ultimately comes down to saying, if they are needing that extra support, it's about what that means to them, how they can provide that support, and if it's then checking to see if it's working, and if it's not working, they should be trying more things. If they're not sure within the school, or if there's anything else that they feel that they could potentially speak to other professionals about getting some advice, is there any other alternative strategies or supports that they could suggest? That's about going back to have that conversation to say, okay, if this is not working, you don't want them to have missed so much out of class because it's too noisy for them. It's about, can they potentially give them another environment to maybe do some catch-up time, or, you know, if they've got specific work that they can do. But that's to go back to the school and ask how they can make that work for them. Beth, I'm not sure if you want to add anything on to that.
No, I think you covered that well. Thanks, Sharon. We've got a question about how early to apply for exam arrangements, and how, like, who makes that decision about what the support should be. It's a couple of questions. I've sort of merged them together. First thing to say in terms of how early it should be applied for, that's not something that a parent should have to worry about. In theory, I know in practice it is something that parents have to manage. As we've said, arrangements should be tied into what support your child is normally getting in their everyday exam and everyday school anyway. So I suppose the real answer is as early as possible. You want your child to be supported throughout their education. That includes exams, but it also includes the rest of the time, you know, in class and that sort of thing. So if your child is going to need exam arrangements, that's probably an indication that they're going to need support in school as well. So it's about working with the school to put that support in place throughout the year, so that then when they get to their exams, they get that support as well. To decide what support you need, that's quite a sort of big, broad question, but really it's all about working to what your child's individual needs are, working with the school, and the school have a responsibility to work with your child and to work with you as parents as well. They should be, first of all, gathering loads of information about your child, observing them in class. Maybe they're taking into account, you know, if your child's done any external assessments for needs, or they've got a diagnosis. They don't have to have one, but if they have gone through that process, any information from that can be really helpful. They should be listening to you. They should be listening to your child as well about what their needs are, what things they struggle with, or what things they're really interested in. Building an understanding of a young person, really, and then based on all that information, building a support plan that's going to help them to meet whatever their needs are. Like we say, that then would carry on into exams. So sometimes the best way to do it is to go right back to the very beginning. What is it that we're trying to help our children to achieve, and how can we get them there? Is it that they struggle with writing specifically? How can we aid them with that? Is it that they need extra support throughout the year to improve their handwriting? Is it that they need access to technology to be able to write down what they want to say because they're much stronger at typing than they are at writing? And therefore, is it a scribe that they need in their exams at the end of the year? So really, that's an ongoing conversation that should be happening within different subjects. It should be the subject teacher that's having those conversations. And it's a tricky balance because as a parent, you have loads of insight and understanding about your child, but you're also not an educator, so you shouldn't have to know what the best support can be. You can go to the school and say, you know, me and my child, we've spoken and we know that the problem is X. This is the thing they really struggle with. What do you think is the best way to meet that need? How can we do it? We know at home we do it like this, and that seems to work really well. Is there something like that we could do at school? You shouldn't really, you shouldn't have to know, so you can go to them and ask. Obviously, I'm sure you're all very intelligent people, and if you do know and you do have really good ideas, then you should suggest them and have those conversations. You know, we at home, when he was learning to read, found that this was the best way to do it. Can we do something like that at school? or, you know, if you're doing your own research, if you're on Call Scotland looking at technologies available, we think this e-reader that we've seen online would work really well for him. Is that something that we could get access to? How do we access technology like that? Those are the kind of conversations you want to be having. So really, it's about starting that dialogue with the school as early as you can, and having that conversation, and building that support plan that works for your child. Anything else you would add to that, Sharon?
Not really. I think the only thing that I would say is that I think even the most important thing is, as Beth said, is about getting it started as early as possible. And I think that also includes for teachers, because there may be some specific training that they maybe need to, you know, try and implement some of the arrangements. That might take them a bit of a time for adjustment as well. So that means that it's a bit of trial and error. And I think that's when it comes into throughout their whole learning, as soon as they possibly can. But again, when it comes to the prelims, they're often a good way of like gathering the evidence to say, we've tried this arrangement, this is what helps, we don't need this, or maybe this could be more helpful, or actually then it's decided that, you know, you would need that for every single exam. And I think that's, but as you say, it's about going back and really just having that discussion and making sure that, you know, they are taking your child's views into account and yours.
Yeah, definitely. A couple of people have asked about what kind of supports a child can get in their exams. We put a bit of a list up before from the SQA. There's a document called Assessment Arrangements for Centres. It's a document designed for the schools and the assessment centres that are running the exams, but it's actually a really helpful way to see what kind of things the SQA will accept as ideas, and they are just ideas, they're recommendations. So potentially there's other things you can do as well. That's a good document to have a look at. But I also wondered, Paul, if you wouldn't mind jumping in to talk about sort of Call Scotland and that technology side of things, because assistive technology is one of the things that a lot of people find helpful for their exams.
Yep. Basically, a young person could use technology either to access and read the question paper itself as a digital question paper, or to type up or otherwise write their answers. Now, just one thing which is probably quite important is you don't need to require an assessment arrangement to use a device to type up your exams. Any candidate, whether or not they have additional support needs, could ask to use technology, you know, to write up an English essay, for example. Whether or not the school can manage that is a separate question. But because it's, you know, if everybody wanted to use their Chromebook or their iPad or their laptop to write up in an examination, then I don't think many schools just wouldn't be able to accommodate that. And one of the reasons for that is that if you use a device in an examination, it needs to be secure. So you can't access the internet. You're not allowed to, you know, access any other potential sources of information for obvious reasons. And also any support tools that would give a candidate an unfair advantage need to be turned off. And so that means things like spell checkers aren't typically allowed unless the candidate's got a spelling challenge, and that spelling difficulty would disadvantage them in the examination. So that's all candidates could use technology, provided it's just a basic word processor with no spell check or anything else. When it comes to learners with additional support needs, which is obviously what we're mainly talking about here, there are different ways you could help. So if the candidate has a difficulty with reading the paper, you know, reading the questions, then you can get a digital version, and that's an assessment arrangement, and the school would be asking for that in the usual way. Now, the timetable for this process is SQA would like all assessment arrangements to be requested by the end of January, I think, usually. So that would be January next year. And there's an online system that schools use. And so for every subject that your child would be sitting, then the school, the support for learning department, and usually the subject teacher for that subject would have a discussion about the type of assessment arrangement that they're thinking would be required. And I think, as Beth and Sharon said, it varies, depending on the subject that you're talking about. So you might need extra time in one subject, but you might not need extra time in another subject. You might want a reader in an examination that's got a lot of reading involved. You might want a scribe in a more wordy subject like English, but you might not want a scribe in mathematics. So it very much depends on what the assessment is. But that process should be happening now, I would expect. In fact, it should really have happened when the course started. And as the course, goes through, if it's National 5 or higher. So the school have got, most schools, I mean, this is a massive job. So I'm always full of admiration for anybody involved in the whole process. And that includes, that's particularly the support for learning staff and the principal teacher of support for learning in your school, because they've got this enormous job of having the whole examination timetable, and also the prelim timetable. And for every single learner that requires an assessment arrangement, they've got to have a great big chart or table or spreadsheet that lists exactly, who's using what, when, and then they've got to make sure this actually happened. So you need to have the readers turning up in such and such a room, and the scribes turning up in another room, and invigilators and technology all sorted out. So it's quite a big task. But as the SQA guidance, quality assurance guidance says, then the whole process should be done in conjunction with the candidates, the learners, and parents as well, so that everyone's happy about what's being proposed. So when it comes to the technology, the kind of options are, you can get your digital version of the digital question paper, and all that is a PDF of the exam, and you could use your technology to make it bigger if you've got a difficulty with the standard font size, or some of the learners I work with have got a physical disability, so they have a problem with turning the pages on the exam, so they might be able to use their technology to just physically manipulate the question paper. Or you could change the colours on the computer screen or the iPad screen or the Chromebook screen, or you could have the questions read out to you with a text reader technology. About 50% of the SQA papers have got answer boxes, and so if the question paper expect you to handwrite your answers in, then the SQA digital one will have an answer box for you to type your answers in, or potentially to do speech to text where you talk and it hopefully accurately understands what you say and puts the answer in. So that's the question papers themselves. The question only papers, so that's things like English, where you read the text and then you read the questions, and then normally you would handwrite your answers into an answer booklet. So for that kind of thing, a candidate would normally be using a word processor or a digital answer booklet, and you could use just typing up. Some candidates could use speech to text instead of a scribe, but to be honest, you have to be quite careful with it, because the examination is quite a unique situation. And if the speech to text isn't accurate enough, if you're dictating and it comes up full of errors, then it actually might be more trouble than it's worth. And you might still be, you might be quite good at using speech recognition and voice dictation on your iPad, and you still might decide to use a scribe in the exam just because it's a bit of a stressful situation. And the last thing you want to have is for the idiot computer to be making loads of recognition errors all over the shop. And then you've got to, or somebody has got to correct them. Yeah, and then there's the spell check question always comes up, and you can use the spell checker if you've got a spelling challenge, and if that would interfere or prevent you from demonstrating what you're capable of doing. And that's a slightly tricky one, because actually there's relatively few SQA exams where spelling is actually assessed. Modern foreign languages and Gaelic, spelling's assessed, but the rest of the subjects I don't think it is. So that you might then argue that you don't need a spell checker, but I don't think that would be true though, because having correctly spelled work in your exams helps the learner, and there's nothing, you know, it's often quite not upsetting but distracting if you've got, you know, loads of spelling mistakes and the learner themselves has difficulty, you know, reading back what they've typed. So although spelling might not be actually assessed in the examination, there's lots of good reasons why having a spell check is a good idea. And so there's a lot of students that do use spell check in examinations for that reason. Where we could help, we've got, I've popped in the chat pane, there's our website, and you can contact us if you want, we'll try and help. And we've got a separate website just for digital assessments. I work with SQA, although I'm not employed by SQA. And so we have quite a lot of discussions about how digital question papers and technology can be better. And there is quite a lot to do because we're aware that a lot of students are being provided with Chromebooks or iPads. And at the moment, there's not really a satisfactory solution for your students to use a Chromebook or an iPad in an examination. And that's kind of annoying because it'd be nice if, you know, if you've become expert at using a Chromebook or an iPad in the class, then you really would want to be using the same thing in an examination. But for a combination of reasons, it's just to do with technology, security, getting the right apps on your devices, then not many schools are planning to do that. And most of them, I think, will be intending to use Windows laptops or Windows desktops. So I don't know, I could go on at great length because I've got a lot to say.
No, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Maybe the thing to do is get in touch if you'd like us to help.
Yeah, perfect. No, thank you very much. That was really, really helpful. So thanks for your input. So yeah, like Paul says, Paul is with Call Scotland. If you want to know more, if you've got more questions about technology specifically, Paul at Call or Call Scotland in general, they are the people to ask for that kind of specific information. We're just coming towards the end of our time, so I hope that you have found this all a helpful session. I think if we're going to sum up the main points that we have is actually what we've got up on the slides there. Really, it's about having that conversation with the school, starting that dialogue, making sure that your concerns or your views and the views of your children as well are being heard, and those conversations are starting. The earlier you can start them, the better, but it should be an ongoing thing, and there should be plenty of opportunities to resolve problems, to try different supports, to find the best way of supporting your child, because as we said right at the beginning, they've got the right to that support if they need it. Anything to add, Sharon?
I think if it's okay, Beth, if we've got a bit of time, there's a couple of quick questions in there. I think maybe just give some quick replies too. There was one that's saying that my son gets told that there's no scribes available when he's doing assessments, and obviously there's a bit of a concern that how are they going to provide that when they're doing during the exams. I would say that absolutely fundamentally needs to go back to either the head of learning support and their guidance, or the head of that department to, you know, really discuss with them and saying if that's been identified as one of their needs and that they're going to require that, you want to find out how they're going to be able to provide it. Two reasons. One is that the fact is they need to be given time, both themselves and for a scribe, to say, how is this actually going to work? They should not be just giving it as a surprise and right at the beginning of when the exam's going to be. There has to be that time to prepare well and make sure it is working, because that's then them showing the evidence it's working. But it also could be seen that, you know, if your child has additional support needs and its class is a disability, it could be seen as a form of discrimination. The fact that he's not getting the right support and the right level of support based on that. I think it would certainly need to be a discussion to see if it's been identified that he needs that, or then it's about saying how are they going to provide that, because he is then going to be at a disadvantage to that of his peers. So I think that's one of the ones from there. Is there anything you would want to add on to that, Beth, for that one?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think if scribes aren't available, the conversation can also be what else can you provide instead? So if the school doesn't have the resources or the staff or whatever, you know, it might be a very legitimate reason they can't do that. What's the alternative? Because your child still has a right to the support they need. If it's a scribe that's not going to be available, have they tried, you know, using ICT instead? Is there an electronic scribe that works well enough that they could use that? You know, what are the alternatives? How else can they meet that need? And also, if it is a resourcing problem, that's the school's responsibility to chase that up. So if they're concerned that they're not going to be able to meet that need, which they do have a duty to do, the school should be contacting the local authority, asking for more funding or more support, or whatever it might be. Because yeah, like Sharon said, they need to find a way to meet that need as best they can. Excellent. I think Kat wanted to jump in and invite everybody to an event that she's going to tomorrow that's sort of connected to this. Do you want to post in the chat, Kat, or are you going to pop?
Yeah, I've just popped something in. It was really just that to let people know that there is currently there is a review of assessments and qualifications going on, and there's an organisation called Connect to support parents who are running some sessions for families of children with additional support needs. And it's a really good opportunity to have a say about your experiences, or if there are issues that parents and carers are experiencing, or children and young people are experiencing. It's a good opportunity to be able to feed into that review. Now, I'm going along and just talking a little bit about what we hear on our helpline, and I'm also just sort of noted down some of the issues that have been mentioned today. So I won't mention any names, but just sort of highlight what the themes of the questions were. But it is an opportunity, if anyone wants to have a say into the changes that might be happening, to go along. So I've posted an Eventbrite link that can you just register, and there's lots of information as well about how to input if you can't go along.
Fab, thanks, Kat. And yeah, I hope that you all found this session really helpful, really informative. We are always open and hopeful to get some feedback from participants. So if there was anything that we did well, anything that we missed, or anything you wish that we'd done differently, if you could let us know either on our social medias that are all posted there, or emailing us info@enquire.org.uk. I think you'll also get a sort of follow-up feedback link evaluation thing when we send you those links and a copy of the PowerPoint. So if you could fill in that evaluation form, we would very much appreciate it. You know, we want to know if this type of session works well, and what we could do differently or better to hopefully inform as many parents as we can about their rights, and about specific topics like exams. There's also a link on there to our parents guide, which is full of information about additional support needs. And we'll send you the links for specific things, but on our website there's specific pages for exams and assessments, and all the stuff that we've mentioned and gone through today. But we hope you found it a helpful session. Thank you very much to Paul from Core Scotland for popping in and managing to answer so brilliantly when I threw him under the bus almost last minute. And thanks very much to Sharon as well for her great support and answers, and to Kat as well for all her admin support. So yeah, thank you everybody for coming, and we'll hopefully see you at the next one.
Yeah, thanks everybody.